Funding for this program was provided in part by the RE Synergy Foundation. Content for the Sustainable World.
My dad was an old-school surgeon who always wished he was a rancher, and a man who took life by the horns and ran with it. Think John Wayne meets Ernest Hemingway meets Teddy Roosevelt. One thing that always embarrassed me, though, was that if my dad saw something interesting wherever he was, he'd go ask about it. He'd start up impromptu conversations with perfect strangers about crop rotation, cattle genetics, or how to get all those pieces of firewood in the load to stay on top of that one little donkey. I was mortified as a kid. Well, I grew up, and now that's me. I married a perfect man with itchy feet who loves all things music and film and who makes documentaries just for the love of it. If you dump all of those things into a petri dish and let them stew for 25 years of blissful chaos, what do you get? Well, welcome to my life of vicarious agriculture. Come on along for the ride.
Hi, would you introduce yourself, please?
So I'm Chad Kramer, president of the National Bison Association. I'm the herd manager up in Custer State Park in Custer, South Dakota, and then also have my own operation, Kramer Buffalo.
How did we manage to pick the one guy out of that group over there that had a title of president and the herd manager, which I know is no small feat?
Yeah.
Wow, okay, so tell me what one does as a herd manager at the state park.
So I've been there a little over 21 years, but a lot of it is, I mean, we're what I like to say, a minimally managed herd there. You know, we actually have the longest running annual production auction of bison in the world.
Wow.
And so we have our annual roundup, which has become, in the last 10 years, quite a spectator event. We've had 9 in the last 10 years, we've had over 20,000 spectators come and watch on Roundup Day.
Wow.
And then we also have our Arts and Crafts Festival that takes place that weekend also, which will have several thousand visitors come through that. And this past year we actually had just over 150 vendors. Which is the most we've ever had at that event too. But for the state of South Dakota, it's getting to be one of the largest events for parks and game and fish.
Well, you kind of have we went up to Fort Robinson in Nebraska and got to do the Longhorn Roundup with them, and that was one of the most beautiful things ever. But it was about as cold as it is now, and they didn't get anywhere near that many people out. So it kind of just does.
Yeah. The Roundup event's the last Friday of September every year.
It was balmy up there then.
Yeah.
Wow. But that's it. Okay, now tell me why that's an important thing to have a roundup.
So, I mean, it basically boils down to population control, you know, and over the years being there and explaining that to visitors, you know, the habitat, the grasslands can only support so much. And the park is almost 71,000 acres, but of that, about 20,000 is grazable acres. So we manage all the wildlife in the park is managed as far as numbers. So we have hunting seasons for elk and deer and that. We manage those, or we monitor those numbers of those populations each season, and then we'll set what the control and the management's going to be. So like for the bison herd, in the 21 years I've been there, our normal numbers we call this time of year after the surplus is about 970 head typically, and then we'll have close to 1,500 in the fall at Roundup, so about 400 to 500 calves a year.
Well, it's, you know, that again, I'm going to go back to the Longhorn thing, because management is something that even if it's a Longhorn that's been running around for 500 years, or the bison, that's not an animal that's used to being cooped up in a small area.
Correct.
And it's self-managed for not only in terms of, you know, foraging and things like that, but in terms of the breeding. So you really you have to make decisions for animals that you never had to make because we put up fences in this country.
Exactly, and that's what it is. I mean, when fences started, you know, 100 plus years ago.
The beginning of the end, right?
Yeah. So now, I mean, they are limited, even whether it's 7 acres or 70,000. I mean, they're limited. So as a caretaker, we have the responsibility to manage that. So you know, we, like in the park, we monitor precipitation. We've been doing that for almost 30 years, and we'll use that data along with the current forage conditions for that season to make our best decision. But we're still, I always tell people, as over the years as I've been there, you're taking your best educated guess because you're setting a number for the next season.
Yes. Well, all farmers and ranchers do that to some extent, but if you're going to have a roundup where you're going to cull a good number of your animals, and I'm assuming culling could mean to the packers, but it could also mean to people like this that want to raise animals, maybe?
Yep.
Okay. So culling is a really important part of it because you're figuring out which ones of the herd are going to go on, and it's all based on what's going to happen in the year, which is a harder and harder thing to judge these days, isn't it?
Right. It is. Like up there, we're in our third season of drought right now, and in the park, we have a little more cushion than it would be on a private operation. So, but it's something we monitor every year, and I mean, it gets to that point, after a year or two, you have to start making some decisions, So, we're kind of at that point right now, trying to look at long-term predictions and forecasts to decide, this next year, do we need to start trending the numbers down? When I started at the park there in 2001, we were in a drought period, which continued for another 3 or 4 years. And so prior to me arriving there, I mean, they were already on that decline as far as our breeding herd.
Okay, so now I'm a Californian. When you say drought, do you mean drought, or is it the same kind of drought we get in California where we're going to have to make drastic cuts, or is it?
It varies. I mean, like I said, this was our third season. So that drought period, I came into that it'd been happening for about 3 years, and it continued for another 3 or 4. And that's where it's been interesting to see the precip data that we have since the early 80s. You kind of see some trends, make assumptions on that, on moving forward, but, they're all different. Yeah. So you just use the data and information that you have to make your best informed decision and stick with it. But I also have my own private operation adjacent to Custer Park there, and I run a little heavier as far as carrying capacity of the animals, but it kind of caught me a little bit this year. So I mean, I'm reducing now by about 40%. From what I have had the last several years. So,
okay, so for people that are not familiar with the Dakotas, and I used to be one of those because I went, the Dakotas, and there's all that space. It's just like space for miles. But you get there, and there's a beauty to that grassland.
Oh yeah.
Aside from those gorgeous birds everywhere you have.
Yeah.
But there's a beauty to these rolling grasses where the wind just goes through and it ripples like the ocean.
Yeah.
It's a glorious thing.
Yeah.
Now, Custer State Park, you have trees, and most people think it's just Sturgis, but
No, we're from the southeast corner of the park, which is about 3,200 foot in elevation. We're what's considered the foothills. So we do have them rolling grasslands and hills. A little bit different than when you get, even several miles to the east out on the prairie and the plains before the Badlands. But we have a large diversity within that 70,000 acres from the southeast corner there at, around 3,200 feet.
Yes.
You get to the northwest corner up in the Sylvan Lake area, we're at, 6,500 feet in elevation, and you change from the foothills to, a ponderosa pine forest and granite peaks and mountains, so a lot of diversity there.
Yeah, and one of the most amazing things I ever saw in my entire life was in Custer State Park. We saw cooperative hunting between a coyote and a badger.
Oh yeah.
And that was amazing because sometimes now you'll see it on the news, but that was an awe-inspiring. Seeing a badger is an awe-inspiring thing anyway, because those are feisty little things. Yeah. But to see them doing something in a way that they were literally working together, and you don't really think about that, but it's not just one thing. It's not just the coyotes run around or the bison run around. It's the whole unit. But I would think that something like drought really impacts all of that because the prairie dogs need to function. The owls are dependent upon the prairie dogs, and the coyotes are dependent upon the prairie dogs, and the whole thing just is really impacted by water. So
definitely. definitely.
It's a scary time, isn't it, in the West? Yes, it is.
Yeah, and it cycles. I mean, like I said, I've seen it 20 years ago, and we're in that cycle again.
Yes,
it's just,
we are.
How's it going to be different?
Yes, we are, very
time?
much so.
That's one thing, I guess. I've actually been raising bison for just over 30 years now. Myself personally, and the operations I've worked for and spending the last 21 years plus at Custer Park there. But being involved like with our national association here over the years, it's most of the folks you'll visit with here that are members or new members or old. I mean, it's this animal here that brought us all together.
Yeah. Well, okay, now this is sort of an exciting thing. I look at it and I say, in what universe does the yak get second billing in terms of the wildest animal at the National Western, right? But it kind of does, because these guys are pretty feisty and they are striking, and they somehow seem wilder than the yaks, which is a really interesting thing. So how new is this, or is this just because I have not seen them up close and personal much in the last couple of years? How new is it to have bison here?
Oh, gal, the early 80s was when they first started the Gold Trophy Show and Sale down here.
Really?
Yep.
Okay, so is it because it hasn't gotten, the bison have not gotten much press until the last couple of years? We're learning a little bit more about the nutritional components of the meat, and it's getting more popular.
I'd say a little bit of both. It's, just with the technology and information availability that happens nowadays, it definitely is more accessible to find out about it. But like I said, we've been here 30 plus years, 40 plus years. So it's, we're a little bit limited over the years. We've been limited by space actually here in Denver at the stockyards, but with this new facility that they're working on,
boy, oh boy.
it's been it's a needed change, and it's provided us, I'd say, a lot more security than in the past. So room for expansion in that. So we got about 100 head of bison here for the auction tomorrow. And the Gold Trophy Show and Sale is kind of you could say the gold standard. So somewhat the best of the best that people bring in, and we'll see tomorrow. These animals were all judged. So we'll have the judges' comments tomorrow morning, and then the auction will be about 10 o'clock, and we'll see what the buyers agree along with that judging. But it's been interesting in the last 30 years to see, just changes within the business and within producers.
Yeah, now is this something, you said they've been judged? Who judges the bison? Is it somebody like you that knows them, or is it somebody that looks in the beef category and says, okay, this is what we're competing with, this is what we're looking for muscle mass, or how does one find a bison judge?
So, usually our judges are experienced producers, and basically, you're looking at livestock conformation is what they're looking at. So, there is data that we collect, so these animals are all weighed when they come off.
Not
but
a whole lot of fitting, though. I noticed.
No,
that, right?
No, yeah, they're.
You're
not gonna wash and blow dry the bison, that's for sure. So, but it is basic conformation. Animal conformation is what them judges are looking at. And I know just over the years listening to discussions, and usually we have judges who will swap out every few years, and there's been some interesting discussions I've heard about on particular traits and animals and such over the years. So and it kind of comes down, we, over the years that I've been in it, we are seeing, I would say, a little bit of a surge in new producers coming in the last few years, on a smaller scale as far as production right now, but they're eager to learn. That's why we've been having our conference here the last 2 days now, and we have speakers. Yesterday I moderated a couple of panels. One was on bison hauling, so we had some experienced producers up there, just sharing their thoughts and comments about transporting bison. Everything from equipment to loading, unloading. What they found works, what doesn't work, what to watch for when you're transporting
that would be
an animal.
Interesting conversation, because boy, these guys are big and they're a little.
Yeah.
If I don't want to go, I'm not going to go, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, amazing idea to think of putting this into our agricultural production system as it exists now. There's a couple more challenges, right? Like the longhorn people, again, is not going to go in the chute because it's this wide. So this is a much larger animal, and it's got a different conformation. It's got a big bump, and those horns are tough. So how does one handle that from a marketing standpoint? Because it's impacted by your ability to get the animal to market, correct?
Yes, it can be. That's for sure. But what it boils down to basically is experience, learning how to work with them instead of trying to force them, because you can't force them. It just doesn't end up a pretty picture if you try to do that. Yeah. So you learn their peculiarities and how to handle them. It's like a long time saying, we've always said you can make a bison go anywhere it wants to.
Well, I always heard you can tell a horse what to do and ask a mule. Is that so?
Yeah,
it's the same
sure.
thing?
Yeah.
We'll get the bumper sticker for all of you guys.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's just learning how to work with them, and that's why when I got started, and it's still a good advice today, is we always recommend for new producers to start with younger animals. Because they grow up, one thing, they adapt a lot quicker to new places, and also you kind of learn with them as they grow up. So it gives you an opportunity to kind of learn how to work with them and move them and what they like. They are not domesticated. I like to say you can habituate them.
Yeah.
But they're not a domestic animal, so you can't get in there and lead them out of there.
But they do have a huge potential, especially in a place where that's warming and resources are not quite so accessible as they used to be. This animal, you would think, having just done on its own for thousands of years, this animal could really contribute something to alternative meats that maybe are not. I mean, am I thinking that correctly? That it doesn't require as much water and as much hay as a cow or some other animal?
They can be more selective. A general rule of thumb I always tell new folks is, that starting with the recommendations for beef is a good starting place.
Okay.
Years ago, they used to say, well, they don't eat as much and such, but you can get yourself in trouble pretty quick.
Yeah.
Just assuming that.
Yeah.
So it really takes time to see that difference and that transition in them.
Well, there's definitely more mass to them, that's for sure. I mean, that's a huge animal.
And as far as the nutritional qualities of it, I mean, it's one of the leanest red meats that you will find.
Okay, so that leads me into one thing. I know that Ted Turner was really big on opening up not only corridors for migration, but he really wanted to market this animal. He's got Ted's Montana Grill and all the rest of that. How important has that been to get the public to be exposed to a meat that might be leaner, might be very healthy? People like that pick up the flag and start saying, hey, we need to look at this. Is that something that has impacted the bison? Yeah,
so I mean, like the example Ted's Montana Grill, I mean, they've done a great job of awareness of the benefits of bison, and more so that, the education on how to properly handle it and prepare it too.
Yeah, because you don't always cook it the same, do you?
No. If you cook it the same as most beef, you're going to have a wreck on it because it's so lean. You just don't have that marbling in the meat. So, we always say slow and low.
That's like kind of the motto.
Yeah, and I mean, when I have new customers, I always tell them or ask, if they're hunters, you prepare it a lot like venison or elk. It's that lean, and that's what you really need to watch for. And even this morning, visiting with the room there, I said, I tell customers and do it myself. A meat thermometer is one of the best tools you have available when you're making it. You just put that in there, and then hopefully you don't overcook it because it's really easy to overcook.
Yeah. Otherwise, my dad always said about at a well-done steak, he says the cow died in vain.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
okay, so
Yeah.
I'm gonna go back to the state park really quickly.
Okay.
How I am so impressed by our certain governments that have understood the necessity to preserve certain things. You know, Texas has got the Trails Association, and we went to Fort Griffin and Fort Robinson in Nebraska and Custer State Park. I mean, this is a huge part of our culture and our history, but we, in many ways, we have to manage them so there's this merge between the old and the new, and the educational and the, hey, that's just something I saw in the farmer, you know, on the rancher down the street. Why is that an animal that's in a state park kind of thing? So do you ever have to really approach that from the state parks perspective when you say, look, that we need to educate people as to why these things are important to South Dakota?
I mean, definitely with the bison, you know, is our largest native grazer in North America. So preserving that, and then when you know the history about, you know, how we went through the late 1880s and that, and the decline of the numbers to less than 1,000 and where we've come back to, just looking at the genetic side of the bison population today, to know that there was, you know, down to so few numbers, and you visit with geneticists about it, and they're pretty amazed that we have the genetic diversity in bison today that we do because of such low numbers. And it shows the species how it can rebound from that, and when given a chance and you know, protected, how they can come back from almost extinction. So.
Yeah, well, when you say diversity, are there clumps of different types of bison across the country, or is this something where it's a bison, and if we need more, you know, if my pool of 1,000 is looking a little narrow, I go down to where does one go to get bison?
So in the last 20 years, there's been a lot of work on genetics on them. And the technology, the advancement of the technology in those 20 years has been tremendous. So. Seems like every few years we have another technological advance that comes. I don't know a lot about it. I mean, I understand it basically, but the way I guess I kind of think about it and tell people is the technology is advanced to where it's a finer tooth comb all the time that we're finding out about the genetics to it. You know, when I first started about 20 years ago, it was on blood typing, and then we went to DNA genetic material, and now we're down to SNPs, and the number of SNPs continues to grow, and so we keep learning more and more about them.
Yeah. So now I'm also going to ask you, we went to Fort Collins to the germplasm facility, and it's an amazing thing where they store all the germplasm for all the agricultural production animals.
Okay.
You know, they don't have horses in there, at least they didn't when we went. But is this an animal that you think if we ever needed to preserve the genetics, you know, say something crazy happens and we have to restart somewhere, and we only get to pick the things that are in the tanks with us, is this one of the animals that you would put in the tank, and if so, why?
I mean,
assuming it would be lost forever if you did not.
Right. No, definitely. I mean, because it is one of the keystone species of the North American grasslands.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of value to having them.
Yeah. They're beautiful.
Yep.
Beautiful. Well, okay, now before I let you go, I just managed to grab you from that bunch of people there, and I appreciate you talking to us. If one wants to learn more about this, do you have a website that you would like to push?
Yeah, so the NBA has bisoncentral.com.
Okay.
And you can find, we have a consumer section, members section. We have different levels of membership. We have our supporter membership. If you're just interested in all things bison, you get our publication, The Bison World, that comes out 4 times a year with that.
Okay.
And access to some parts of the website. So yeah, bisoncentral.com would be a really good starting place.
Okay, and I'm assuming maybe like many breed organizations, you have a little bit of a mentoring thing going on if people start with a new animal?
Yep, we do. We're a board of directors, and over the course of the year, I mean, this is our annual gathering down here, our winter conference all the time, but we have summer conferences. This past summer, we actually did more regional conferences versus one large summer conference. You know, different, just things transition and people are busy and getting away for 4 or 5 days to attend them gets to be more of a challenge all the time. So this past year we actually went to doing more regional gatherings, a 2-day event where in a region, they usually one of our state and regional associations hosted it. And working with the national, we put together speakers and presentations there, and usually a farm tour, ranch tour on one operation or a few in the local area. And just gathering producers or people that are interested to just talk about all things bison.
Fantastic. And I'm just going to ask you to tell people about the Custer State Park. Where do we go? I think it's the National Park Service, or it's the state park of South Dakota.
Actually,
it's not a national.
State of South Dakota owned herd, and it was started in 1914. So we have a long history, and like I mentioned earlier, we have Custer State Park has the longest running annual production sale of bison in the world. Yeah,
and it's one of the most beautiful places on earth. Which 20 years ago I never knew I would have said about South Dakota. But it really is. It's beautiful state in general.
Well, thank you.
Thank you so much.
You bet.
You're not shivering at all. I can tell you're from South Dakota, and I'm Californian, so that fur is looking really warm to me, but I'm not going to go over there to huddle up. There's no way. Thank you.
You're welcome.